Hi, Michela. Hi, Michela.
Hello, hi everyone.
Oh,
Hi.
I already introduced you, like
Oh, thank you.
forerunner and a spearhead for the new European Bauhaus, and a lighthouse in yourself for the contribution of arts, technology, and creative communities. So we asked you to give like the final talk today, sort of giving us an upper on the bigger landscape of art, culture, and creativity, like taking us into a better future. So
Well,
that's a tall one.
Thank you, Marianne. I will try and share my screen. So bear with me for 1 second. Let me see if we can do that. And so let me know if you can see my slides.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. One thing that I really wanted to focus on today, firstly, I want to start by showing you what do we mean by culture creative ecosystems from the perspective of our practice. So as you know, in the European Bauhaus, we are all very much working on the ground with communities. And this has really informed all of the recommendations that we have made at European Bauhaus level, and all of the, let's say, paradigm shifting implementations that we have suggested. And this has now been growing, as you very well know. So to start with, I will show something from our latest labs that we have run in Portugal. And then I want to go on to look at what are the opportunities that we currently have in terms of integrating the creative ecosystems with particularly where we collaborate with industry, because obviously what this community seems to be really, really good at is the cultural aspects, integrating cultural policy into projects. What I've been focusing more lately is how do we change the paradigms for industry? So that's the bit that I really want to kind of focus on. So to start with, just a very, very brief moment from our last labs, and hopefully you'll be able to see and hear it. So in our last labs, we focused on ecosystem living. And the reason why we did that is because the whole idea of living ecosystems is really pertinent to our practice, but also because when we deal with the European Bauhaus, and of course here we're dealing with the living environment, we often refer to the usual practice of urban planning, which is focused on very complex urban ecosystems, usually inner city ecosystems, the complexity of urban infrastructures, how the land is apportioned, how the infrastructures are managed, for example. But then we don't include more than human ecosystems in these discourse, or very rarely do we include them. So that was one motivation. The other one was that when we start to refer to ecosystems that are perhaps outside of urban environments, we start to talk spatial planning. And spatial planning historically is linked to the practice of dividing up the land and land ownership. And again, that whole direction seems to leave out, again, modern human ecosystems, other species, other ecosystems that we need to incorporate into this discourse. So we felt that in order to incorporate living ecosystems in our thinking, we would come up with this term ecosystem living and give ourselves a big challenge. And what was wonderful is we were working in situ on the ground. So these are people from various different backgrounds, but led by the cultural creative sector, of course, and led with the sort of methodologies that have been developed by our community here, the one that is present at this conference, and where that is really well versed in terms of the methodologies for engaging across different disciplines, that always works with different industries, different domains, and therefore it incorporates everything into its thinking. It has very much a kind of holistic perspective. Now, this image sort of summarizes it very well. This is one of the things that we picked up on the ground. And if you actually look at it closely in amongst these beautiful structures and living beings that are incorporated in it, there is also human technology that's very much part of these ecosystems. And I think it really serves as an illustration for what our consideration need to be. I will give you just one example of a project that came out from a very young artist from Berlin that was part of our labs. We had all kinds of people as part of it, oceanographers and various different scientists and experts in different fields. But what was wonderful was that Max Bareitzer-Smith, who's here in the photo, is a young artist who was really curious to interact with other domains and other areas of knowledge. And he started by literally working from the ground up, like many people there. And what he did was pick up a lump of an example of an ecosystem, which is the mussels ecosystem, and started to analyze how this ecosystem is formed with the help of biologists. And what came out was a very beautiful piece of work to begin with, which was a piece of research. This was him dissecting the ecosystem into its constituent parts. And what was very interesting about it was that as he was taking it apart and the whole process of how this ecosystem comes together was being explained, he uncovered this piece of connective tissue, which is called the byssus. And this, we later found, is actually something that was used to create something called sea silk in ancient times. So Egyptians and Romans wove this superfine cloth, like some of the most expensive cloth that you could get, was made out of this connective tissue that is the very, we could call it technology, that connects the muscles together. So by investigating these systems, we actually found a possible thread to a piece of, let's say, technology or biomaterial that we have left behind, and we could actually start again experimenting with. What was wonderful as a result of this process, in his case, was that he created 9 lessons from mussels on ecosystem living. And these 9 lessons are something that was just delightful for the rest of us, because if you read it, not only is it hugely inspiring as an artistic interpretation of the investigation that he made into these ecosystems, but also, I mean, I could put this forward to an urban planning team as a point of inspiration, because when we start to rethink the use of materials and circularity and how we integrate also inclusion and diversity into our strategies, and how do we incorporate technologies, and technology in this case is the byssus, which actually so happens to be the source material for this fine cloth. We actually start to get completely a different picture as to how we can create strategies for living environments. So this was an example of working from the ground up with our community, just one small project that would illustrate sort of our thinking and how we go hands-on with experimenting on the ground, and then how we end up with being able to incorporate some of these strategies then further into policy. So I'm going to jump straight over into how we apply certain strategies. So one thing that I would like to point out to you, and this is in the context of us collaborating with industry in the Horizon program. So we're jumping from experimenting on the ground with multidisciplinary communities with the arts straight over to industrial policy and large-scale projects with huge amount of different large players from industry. And this is the topic of materials commons. So some of you may be aware that I founded something called Industry Commons that was then adopted as a program at the European Commission, and it was very much about cross-disciplinary collaboration, something that's more familiar to us, particularly in the design world. And in this was in the context of creating cross-domain data-driven ecosystems, which are very much needed now. If you contextualize it, for example, in the Green Deal and the European Bauhaus, following the life cycle of materials and products as it is being done in some of the projects now, for example, the Wasserhauen project, which is following the full life cycle of wood. So from the following it from the forest through the mills, through the design and production, through application, etc. We need to be able to traverse all the different domains, and we need to be able to follow those. As a result of the industry commons concept and the result of the activities that happened with the community that incorporates large players such as sort of Airbus, Bosch, Siemens, etc., a new proposal was created by the DGRTD, which is the materials commons. Now, we did a soft launch of this in Berlin at Fraunhofer in April under the title Towards the Materials and Manufacturing Commons. Some of the manufacturing commons we are working on actively, but the materials commons will see another launch workshop, and they've asked me to create the sort of foundational concept for it mid-September. And this is something that was what was particularly interesting when the European Commission created this initiative and when we had our soft launch, is that for the first time, as well as the NMBP, so the nano materials modeling, manufacturing domains, they invited BEDA, so the Bureau of Design Association, European Design Associations. And as you know, it has now a Danish president, or probably some of you already know. And the fact that BEDA was represented at this meeting indicated a very clear intention by the European Commission to incorporate design, product design and design of materials, particularly, for example, new materials and bio-based materials, into the whole program of what would normally be the domain of large industry in the NMBP domain. So I really wanted to highlight this idea of materials commons that's being launched. I would really like to invite the community, particularly the community that is that comes from the design domain, to get involved now, because we are literally now uniting the domains between the industry and these large players from industry and design in the Horizon programs. And this is really where the big funding grants are, the big programs are still being held. So one of the things that's related to this is this idea that is also coming very much from the ethos that we carry in our domain, which is about this data-driven systems. If you have been following some of this work, you will know about FAIR data, for example, which is findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Now, this is now a standard that's being followed throughout programs, and it's very much about the technical connection between the different domains in terms of data. But because we come from a domain that is very much anchored in societal values and in ethical principles, we suggested at first to the European Open Science Cloud, and then it's later been recommended to Connect and to other parts of the program, the idea of a just data researcher or just data owner. And that is, it stands for judicious, unbiased, safe, and transparent. It's not a metric by any means. It's about creating a practice that aims to be just and in parallel to fair data. So whilst we solve our technological challenges of connectivity, we also really very much wish to include the idea that there is a responsibility on behalf of the researcher or on behalf of the data owner. And it's about aiming to be just rather than a metric. Now, this is something that we've been invited now to present in various different places, and it was very welcomed by the European Open Science Cloud when we first presented it. But this is just one example of how we carry the values from our sector into the bigger picture, into the bigger agenda. And one project that's really very much doing that, so it's a small but very, very powerful coordination action that we're now running. It's the first coordination action for the European Bauhaus. It's about bringing the digital to the new European Bauhaus communities. And this is a very, very powerful junction. I will run you through some of the things that we have united under this project. Currently, the website's having a revamp because it was originally just put up by an agency, but it's now there is a deliverable coming up where we actually properly reconsider a community-led website. So I will then invite you all to join, because this is, as I will show you in a second, we've managed to galvanize the entire NEB community for the first time in around a mission that is not just led or rather incentivized constantly by the JRC, but it's actually now the community has kind of run off with the idea, if you like. And the way that we did that was that we organized an event. Some of you may know that I'm advisor to CERN, and I was able to unite some of the ambitions from the CERN side of actually wanting to be more NEB, which was hugely welcome, and it is it's great news that a large research facility like this one really wants to have adopt the NEB principles, and this is now being taken forward. But I also organized with them to host the NEB community, and we managed to galvanize all of the NEB Lighthouse projects for the first time. We brought the NEB Lab projects, then Smart Communities projects from DG Connect. So there are some fantastic initiatives that are very, very much in synergy with the NEB principles that are already happening there within the Smart Communities. And of course, the CERN, some of the CERN projects, which are like the Green Village, which are going in the NEB direction. So I'll just let a little bit of the sort of visuals run in the background. But what was really amazing about this is that we had as our main focus the content of the new NEB Academy. So I don't know how many of you have heard about this idea of creating a European Bauhaus Academy. It is, of course, targeting the construction sector and the all of the domains, of course, that service it. And it is really very much about creating new kinds of curricula and new kinds of methods in which we can change the traditional learning patterns in that domain, and of course, transform the practices. Now, this is no small feat, of course, and it required the community to completely come together. So we had several workshops over 2.5 days that are being held. First about the content of the NEB Academy and discussions about the NEB Academy, and then discussions about how do we take the digital to NEB, but also how do we take the NEB principles to the digital. And I think that's really where it's at, because we can certainly change some of the existing preconceptions. This is probably quite appropriate slide to land on. This is a slide by Matti Kuittinen. Of course, the artwork is by Banksy, and it really does capture what we're up against in this sense. And this is not only being used as a word of warning, but also it is in some ways, it has to some extent become a political tool. And there's a bit of a ping pong going on in this domain. And it is, if you actually look at it objectively, it should not be questioned at all. But currently, this is what we're facing. So as a community, galvanizing the community around a common mission is absolutely paramount, because we do need to pursue these kinds of goals. This is again Matti's slides. I've borrowed from the community a few slides so I can illustrate what the community is about just briefly. And this slide particularly highlights the Nordics. I really want to highlight the Nordics as being the champion of this, and the fact that if the previous slide sort of gave us a lesson, I think where we can really show and demonstrate how this is done is in the Nordics. And I think the fact that this current conference is being hosted by Aarhus is relevant not only for this reason, but also for the fact that you will find in the next few slides, the European Lighthouse projects, a total of 30 million that's already invested, are really, they really have a very strong presence in the Nordics. So this is Desire, one of the lighthouse projects, which starts with creating pilots in Denmark, but then includes also follow-ups with Riga, Amsterdam, Ljubljana, Milan, and Turin. So this is one project that you should watch out for and probably connect with, because for me, one of the best things about this community that has now decided to basically not work on their own anymore, but they want to work together as a community, is just the amount of different locations, different cities and regions that are active. So another one that's active and has Öresund actually in the north is Bauhaus of the Seas Sales. So you may have heard of some of these projects or seen some of the presentations. Another really wonderful project that obviously focuses on our impact on the living environment and close to the seas, or the sea's impact on our living environment. We have more from Ice Heart's hands. These are the lighthouse districts from this lighthouse project. There is Nebstar Stavanger. So this one's focused on Stavanger with lessons learned for other parts of Europe. But what's interesting about the Stavanger project is actually run also by the local developers, who are not normally people who engage with European projects. So it's what was very interesting with them was they really wanted to change the way that the developers think about these initiatives. And then we have Cultuur Campus Rotterdam, which is, if I'm not mistaken, and don't quote me if I remember correctly, it was something like 40,000 square meters of space, which is going to be dedicated to education, to co-creation activities, to co-design programs in Rotterdam. And also Neighborhoods, which is in Munich, in Neuperlach, in this particular district. This is just one of their missions, for example, with animal-aided design. And again, this idea of modern human ecosystems, which has been incorporated into their strategy. So, as I said, these lighthouse projects, that's 30 million that's already funded. They are probably in your neighborhood somewhere or in one of your cities. You should connect to them because the community is now working as one. And then together with the NEB labs and together with smart communities projects as well. And a strong connection to CERN, who are now discussing NEB intervention in the CERN environment to create a better living environment for the huge CERN complex, which is, you probably know, being constructed midway last century and therefore has very different values. So these are the things that are happening from the ground up. And on that note, you will have seen this slide from me before. I'm happy to say that when it comes to this idea of the regional sparks, creating regional sparks with small injections of funding to begin with, but then scaling it to become much bigger initiatives, this has been passed by Parliament, and it's currently being implemented with legal mechanisms. So this idea of 100 labs for 100 regions may well come soon. And of course, what's going to be really important is that all of these labs, all of this seeding of ideas locally and then scaling it to this bigger mechanisms is actually enabled by the cultural creative sector or all the experts that we have in the room. And part of that, part and parcel of that, and as part of DG NEB, we have funded the reworking of Gropius's Bauhaus wheel, which you see on the left, into a new kind of wheel that takes care of all of the different new considerations we need to have. And this was a wheel developed by Jan Åman. Some of you may have come across him as developing the Norlands model. So the idea is that in combination with these lab sparks, that we would also use this as a method for engaging communities. And as part of that, each one of these parts of the wheel, it's a big a program that's been written as a handbook. And as part of it, there are, for example, these elements that have been taken out of the Norlands model, for example, for the how to deal with waste. So just let's say 3 concluding things that I have said before, but I will say again. One is focusing on where we converge so that we combine our capabilities, that we unite as a community with all of our different areas of expertise. This is one that has proven to really work for our sector, and here where we have the ambition of joining with industry in large-scale programs, bearing in mind that some of the policy that's coming out is coming from the cultural policy perspective. So that one was traditionally attached to the Cultural Europe program. What I'm looking at instead is the part of our sector that is providing professional service to industry, and that part is really subject to rather different strategies, or should be subject to different strategies than sort of the kinds of strategies that find its roots in Cultural Europe. This is about really joining forces with big industry players and changing or rather helping the industry transition. And this is where we are very, very strong from the point of view, for example, of design, our history of design and professional practice. The other thing being, beyond the European perspective, we are preparing a big festival for NEB next year, and this one really will have a global dimension, and we've already had uptake from various global locations. So this one, I really, really want to emphasize that, you know, I would invite everybody here to present here to be involved with, because what we want is to take the best practice and then really turn this into a paradigm that is shared globally. And then the one that I mentioned, which is to each region according to its needs. So with the NEB Lighthouse projects, where we can connect really strongly across the regions, but also with this idea of 100 NEB labs for 100 regions, where we can set the agenda, set the spark for larger mechanisms for uptake. So I hope that gave you a few directions for where we might be going with some of these initiatives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michela. Thank you. Thank you for calling the urgencies, but also pointing to the potentials and possibilities. Really important.
Yeah.
And we are looking forward to welcoming you in Aarhus on site.
Yes, I'm as I say, well overdue, and there is a plan to do that. So I'm hoping that the next time round we can actually arrange for that.
Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.